We're now joined. We have a special guest here on Believe in Chiefs, Andrew Brandt, who has his own podcast, Business Sports, that I encourage all of you guys to listen to. It's on my regular list. Also, check out his mysunday7.com, his newsletter. He's going to tell you about more of the stuff that he does, but he's definitely an expert in sports business. And so, Andrew, my first question, we got to talk about the Patrick Mahomes contract because I feel there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Is he actually underpaid, or they restructured it last year to give him a little bit more money? So is he now kind of more appropriately paid? I'd love your analysis on this.
Yeah, thanks, and always good to be with you guys. I've talked a lot about Patrick Mahomes' contract, and your question's an interesting one because it depends on the tense. Okay, so now we're doing English class. If you're asking if he is currently underpaid, the question is clearly no. If you're asking, was he underpaid? Clearly yes. And will he be underpaid? Clearly yes, because he did something that if I was advising players, I would say never do. He committed basically his entire career on one contract. And it's great to have a long contract if you feel comfortable in a guaranteed contract sport like the NBA or Major League Baseball or even hockey. If you feel like you understand the market's going to go crazy, but you're locked in and you've got these guarantees. But I don't get it in the NFL for the player side, and I don't get it for premium positions as well. And let me just say that if you're a running back in the NFL, sure, do a 10-year contract. Get the biggest signing bonus you can, because chances are it's your last veteran contract. But if you're a quarterback, the market changes so often. We just talked about this all summer with Dak Prescott. He did a 4-year deal 3 years ago and put himself in a complete leverage situation against the Cowboys because they either paid him again or they let him go to free agency where he would have made even more than he's making. And that's the way to do it if you're looking at a purely business sense. So Mahomes signs this extraordinary length. I think it was a 10-year contract, but already had 2 years left. So basically committed 12 years to the Chiefs in 2020 during the pandemic. And the thing about it was that's 2020 to 2032. Think about how much the quarterback position market-wise would move in that time, and already has 4 years later. I think when he signed it, maybe top quarterbacks were making $30 million a year, and now they're making $60 million a year. And of course, in 5 years, they'll be making $90 million a year. So he missed out. Now, the Chiefs did the right thing, as we talked about, and upgraded years. I think it's years 4, 5, 6, 7. So of that 12 years, this middle part, he is at the top of the numbers, except for, I think, Prescott. And it's a representative contract for who he is. But they didn't upgrade the years he made $63 million over 3 years, which was just pennies compared to what he should have made. And that was part of a veteran contract. And they didn't address 2028 through 2032, which I'm sure they will. But my point about the business of sports is that long contracts for star players always give the team leverage, even if it's at a high number, because the market's going to change. Now, will the Chiefs upgrade it again? Sure. But if things go south, if there's a downturn in performance, if there's a huge injury, it's the Chiefs, not Mahomes, that has the leverage. And I don't just say this about Pat. I said this about the Josh Allen contract, the Justin Herbert contract, the Joe Burrow contract. They're all 7, 8 years. That's too long. It's a great thing for the team.
Let me ask you this. It operates in a vacuum, right? Things happen and they're dynamic and they're not static. And if you look at this, to make a weird business analogy, like variable cost versus fixed cost, right? For a company, for a corporation. Is the layperson correct for thinking, well, Patrick's got this contract, but his earning potential outside of football, right? Because it's not his compensation, I'm sure, and you would know this probably better than anyone, because I can only imagine, because when I played in the 90s, offensive linemen got endorsements for gloves like
Right.
for $500 a year through Wilson, right?
Right.
Like, come on, like we're talking now, like he is ubiquitous, right? He is everywhere. Is he making more money on the outside based
Oh,
on the
good
fact
question.
that the Chiefs are giving him exposure? He's won 3 Super Bowls in the last 4 years. He is a household name. And did he do that based on the fact that they were able to use money to keep guys like Chris Jones, Travis Kelsey, make new signings, right?
Yeah.
Do all the things that a team does. How does that all intersect with this from your perspective? Because that's how I look at it a little bit. Like, yeah, okay, so what's the difference between 50 million? Like, this is a guy, top
Yeah.
salaries when I was playing in the 90s were, a top left tackle was making $900,000
Yeah.
a year. Now they're making 35 million. Like, so I don't have that perspective
Yeah.
of how does it all fit together for a guy like Pat Mahomes?
Yeah. I think
Because
there's
what's the
two.
difference? But what's the difference between 50 million and 80 million at this point
Yeah. I
in
think
contract?
there's two issues. One is the money off the field and endorsements adding to your annual compensation. The other issue is making room for other guys, and I'm going to deal with them separately because the
Okay.
latter one, I think fans really don't understand. Um, I look at it from a negotiating point of view, and my career is 10 years on the agent side, 10 years on the team side. Completely different perspectives, of course, but basically doing the same thing,
Mhm.
just representing different sides. If I was a player agent and the team said to me what you just said, well, we're paying him a little less than the other guys, but he's making so much more off the field. I would tell the team to go pound sand
Okay.
because, like, what are you telling me? You're telling me we're going to pay him less than the market or top of market because he's making off-field money? That's not part of our equation.
Mhm.
Our negotiation is about value.
Okay.
I mean, you could say the same thing about well, he plays in a cheaper city than New York or LA. That should not, from a player point of view,
Mhm.
be part of the thing. Now, from a team point of view, if I'm negotiating as I was for the Packers, I'm not necessarily, I would say that to Brett Favre or Aaron Rodgers, but I would say, to players that are like offensive linemen, to use your example, that are pointing to the marketplace of a player blocking for, pick a name, Brock Purdy. And I would say to the agent, we're paying our quarterback $50 million a year. That offensive lineman you just referred to, they pay their quarterback $1 million a year. So you should give us a break there.
Mm.
Now, whether the agent says yes or no, yeah, but you have to look at these things as representation. If Pat Mahomes is telling whoever negotiated his contract, yeah, go a little easy on them because I make so much off the field. I mean, that's a hard discussion to have as an advocate. And that's what I am. I have been an advocate, a lawyer, because you don't want that other stuff getting in the way of top value. The thing about other players, the Chris Jones, listen, I've said this for 10 years. People don't get this. Every quarterback makes room available for other players by doing what every team asks them to do, which is cap restructure.
Mhm.
So Pat Mahomes is going to make $30 million. Team comes in and says, hey, you're still going to make that 30, but we're going to take 28 of it and put it in a bonus. So it's spread out over the next 4 years, goes down from 28 to 7. We push out 21 and we make this room and we can sign Chris Jones and we can sign a big receiver. We can do whatever. That's a no-brainer.
Mhm.
What is not a no-brainer from the player side is taking less cash. Everyone can move around cap. Moving around cap is what teams do, what players do. Never seen a quarterback say no to that. But when you start messing with the cash, then you're messing with the player's pocketbook in a way that you could have answered the other needs through cap, not cash. So this is the Tom Brady example. There's so many people say, well, Tom Brady made room for Edelman and Gronk. Like, yes, but he didn't have to take less money. He did that through cap. So everyone has to understand cap and cash are two different things. Cash is real hard green money. Cap is accounting. And all these teams do the accounting game all the time.
That's
Andrew,
fascinating.
fascinating, and that's one of your points. I encourage all the listeners out there to check out your Business of Sports podcast, because that's one of your mantras, and
Yeah.
you explain it's not only informative. I write for Forbes, and I get a lot of great information from it, but you also explain it in kind of easy to understand terms. So more with Andrew in a second, but first, Bet Online is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, Bet Online provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. Head to Bet Online today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. Bet Online, the game starts here. Joe and I both go back pretty far with our guest, Andrew Brandt. Joe has his Philly connection, his Villanova and Penn connections. I was actually a writer for Packers.com in 2005. That's why I've got my Packers shirt in your honor. Before you kind of entered the media landscape, you're now writing for SI.com. But you coincided with Andy Reid there, Andrew. Can you share some stories about what he was like?
Well, let's say I'm going to tell you the story when I met Andy Reid. Andy Reid had left the year before I came in Green Bay. But first of all, he left quite a legacy. Whenever I went around, we looked at homes and like Andy Reid, man, it's like Andy Reid. Everyone knew Andy Reid and his wife Tammy, and he was a big legacy in Green Bay when he left for Philadelphia. And then later, when I moved back to Philadelphia, where I moved after Green Bay, because after moving my wife to rural Wisconsin for 10 years, she got to pick the next stop. And she's a Villanova girl. So that's how I ended up back here. But when I met Andy Reid, I was an agent, and I had a player out of Boston College named Matt Hasselbeck. And Matt was not invited to the combine, right? Not invited. Wow. So I was pissed. We were pissed. I didn't have much influence. I couldn't get him invited. We had a one-day tryout at Boston College. I invited every team in the league. And I got one RSVP. And it was from the quarterback coach of the Green Bay Packers named Andy Reid. He said, I like Hasselbeck. I want to come see him. I'm like, great. I said, you know what? Since you're the only one, I'll pick you up at the airport and drive you over to Boston College at Logan. He's like, great. So in those days, before 9/11, you could pull right up. And I did. And guys, I had never seen Andy Reid. I drove a little Porsche. And so, oh my God, I look at him and I go, oh boy. So I now yank everything in the car back and I squeeze him in there. And it's really like driving over to BC like he's in a Jack in the Box.
I love it.
Because I had to push his head down and get him in. Oh my, I'll never forget it. He never will either. And he loved Hasselbeck. And,
that's awesome.
And I said to Matt, like, I don't know if you get drafted, but if you do, it's going to be the Packers. Sure enough, it was. And 6th round, and he developed a great relationship with Andy. Yeah. Andy developed him, and then, of course, Andy left. But Matt played 20 years, as you know, and I think a lot of it he owes to Andy.
Oh, that's awesome. I remember the first time I met Andy. Andrew was the Philadelphia alumni group that was spearheaded mostly by a lot of ex-Eagles, but you had some folks who'd settled in Philly who played for other teams. And when he got the head coaching job in Philly, we met him for lunch, and you know where he wanted to go? He's like, I just want to go a little sandwich joint. We went to Pep Saloon in Prospect Park, Delaware County, off of 95. Not because he wanted a roast beef sandwich, and he had heard that they were like really made a good roast beef sandwich. And it was so cool to have met him that early on in his career, because I sensed right away that he was the right guy for Philly, and he was the right guy to become a head coach. And didn't get to know him during my playing days, but we knew that he was the right guy. So I'm picturing him in your Porsche, and I'm thinking, you're thinking he's going to be a QB coach. He's going to look like
Yeah, slim guy.
and here comes
It's
Andy.
interesting you say that, Joe, because speaking of Joe Banner, who's been a longtime friend of mine and was kind of mentoring me when I started in the business, he called me in 1998 and said, between us, confidentially, we're thinking of hiring or interviewing this guy named Andy Reid. And I was Matt's agent. And he's like, can we talk to Matt? And I'm like, sure. So kudos to Joe and Jeff Lurie for not only honing in on Andy, but wanting to really do their due diligence. They talked to a lot of proteges that Andy had.
That's great.
They did their homework for sure. Andrew, I wanted to ask you, the trade deadline was really fun and to monitor, and that was such a big storyline, so many trades. And it's interesting, a lot of the trades there wasn't much compensation. I kind of wanted to ask you about this trend. For example, Josh Uche, the Chiefs got him from the Patriots, an edge rusher. So the Patriots received a 2026 sixth-round pick in the trade. And so he's a free agent after the season. So isn't it possible the Chiefs don't re-sign him and actually receive a compensatory pick that is higher than that and sooner than that? So my question is, why wouldn't some of these teams, like the Patriots, just keep him and get that pick, if I am correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing with these trades is a lot of players at the end of their contracts that they feel won't be back. And yes, they could have gotten a compensatory, but you never know with that secret super duper formula that the compensatory people use. And I think teams just want out from under players because, and this goes back to my Packer days, you want to develop young players in the second half of the season, especially for teams going south. So I think you look at a team, Cleveland got rid of some players and Saints got rid of some players. They're obviously not looking at playoffs. They're looking at developing young players to know what they have for the future. And then it becomes taking what you can get. When people are surprised they're only getting 6th or 7th or 5th, it's the market. The market is what it is. They're not turning down third-round picks. But I also think, and this again goes to my nerdy personality about the business, money matters. So, there are different levels of, like the Adams trade to the Jets. The Jets inherited a big number on Devontae Adams for a third-round pick. Now, Amari Cooper goes to the Bills, same third-round pick, but they only inherited minimum salary because he'd been paid off by the Browns. So the Cooper trade, in my book, is a much better trade for the Bills than the Adams trade for the Jets, even if you believe Adams is a better player. So you can't just look at trades in a vacuum with picks. I think you have to look at the money part of it too.
So in that Uche trade example, it's kind of like, well, they could have gotten a compensatory pick, but now they at least they know exactly what the pick is. It sounds like you made an interesting point that, he probably wasn't in their future plans, and now they can look at their young edge rushers. But yeah, I was just that's really fascinating, that your insight on that, Andrew.
Yeah, I think, in my day, the trade deadline was even further earlier and there wasn't much trading. They moved it back through COVID to the 8th week. It was the 6th week, after the 6th week. That makes for a little more trading. I think they should move back to like the 10th or 12th week, like akin to what baseball and basketball do. But NFL never agreed with that. They wanted it mid-season at the latest.
Do you feel like 1993 and the Reggie White case was one of the, if not the most pivotal points on the NFL timeline as it relates to the complexion of the game and the intersection of the NFL as a business and a sport?
I do, Joe. And it's funny because I just taught that class at Villanova Law about the advent of free agency in the NFL, where a lot of people think free agency's been around forever. As you noted, 1993. And it all emanated out of what I talk about all the time. As you know me from X, Twitter, there will be lawyers. There were lawyers that were advocating for Reggie White, who was the biggest name free agent in football. And through a lawsuit, basically, against the NFL, it resulted in a settlement. and that codified into a CBA, which has really been the model for all CBAs since. And if you had to narrow that CBA down 500 pages down to 4 words, it's basically 2 words for each side. 2 words for the owners is salary cap, 2 words for the players, free agency. So that was the trade-off. And that's the system we have in all sports but baseball. Basically, we've allowed free agency. In the NFL, you need 4 years. In baseball, you need 6 years. In basketball, you need 4 years. And then there is a cap, which is a collective action to really limit collective pay. It has nothing to do with individual pay, but limit collective pay. And that's something that's been a staple of the American sports system, totally unlike European sports, totally unlike soccer internationally. But that's what we are. I always call American sports kind of law and order sports. It's very regulated compared to other countries.
Yeah. It's interesting because a good friend of mine, you may or may not remember the name Lindsey Knapp. He went to Green Bay from Kansas City in a trade right before the 93 season. And I remember, Reggie standing up in meetings, or I don't remember, but Lindsey told me the story. We remained really good friends. And Lindsey was one of those guys, had his MBA from Notre Dame before he even made it to the NFL. So, he kind of had some things going on upstairs, and he basically said to Reggie during the meeting, he said, well, Reggie, I appreciate what we're trying to do here. He said, but I'm going to tell you something. If this passes and we end up having unrestricted free agency, he basically said, I won't have a job next year. And Lindsey laid out all the points. I'm going to have a league minimum of X. And I'm not a full-time starter. Therefore, the middle class of the league is going to get squished, and you're going to have 20% of the players making 80% of the salary, and you're going to have to round the roster out with 1, 2, and 3 year players who have a league minimum of, at that time I think it was like 175,000, and you jump to like 425 when you were a 4 or 5 year veteran. And he's like, I'm not going to have a job because didn't really want to hear it, right? Because he's like, no, we've got to go for this thing. And Lindsey had some great points. Reggie had great points. And I always go back to that about what it did for the NFL, especially in those early years when they were trying to figure it all out, right? About how do you pay 20% of the players 80% of the salary?
Yeah, I mean, that star system is throughout sports and entertainment, like you just talked about. There's the star players are going to make the money. When I managed the salary cap, Joe, for 10 years in Green Bay, and I worked in Philly too, it's really about how are you going to pay your stars? And the way to do that is really your young players have to balance it out. So young rookie contracts are years 1, 2, 3, 4. They're really reasonable. I mean, a second or third year player, their cap number's not even $1 million. So if you have 30 of those on your team or 40 of those on your team, then it's, 40 million for 40 players is your cap. That leaves 220 million or 210 million for 20 players.
Right.
And managing the cap now is about finding the money for your elite players. I always thought we'd have 6 to 8 elite contracts on our team. Usually it comes down to the same quarterback, left tackle, pass rusher, shutdown corner, and 1 or 2 others. And that's how teams are managed these days.
Andrew, this was awesome, man. Tell listeners where else they can find you. You're on. You have so many different media platforms.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to be with you guys, and people can find me. Obviously, everyone knows me from X, but I do Instagram as well, Andrew Brandt 2. I do these reels. The Sunday 7 newsletter is a way that really gets more of my insights on Sundays in sports, even beyond the NFL. And there's some videos that come with that. So go to mysunday7.com. And of course, the podcast, The Business of Sports. I know there's a ton of sports podcasts like this one, but I hope that one's truly unique for people to really learn about the business and legal in sports and not just football. So those are and my column at Sports Illustrated. And then, of course, I have my day job at Villanova in running a sports law program at Villanova Law School, where Joe's daughter is a proud graduate. So check me out wherever you can. I always enjoy trying to teach, enlighten, and inform.